You check the time. 10 minutes later, you check it again. You have nowhere to be. No meeting, no deadline, nothing waiting on the other side of the clock. And yet your eyes keep drifting back to it over and over, like something is pulling them there. The obvious answer is that you're just curious about the time. But the real answer is far stranger. You're not checking the clock to find information. You're checking it to calm something down. Think about what time actually meant for most of human history. There were no clocks for almost the entirety of it. No watches, no phones, no glowing numbers in the corner of a screen. And yet your ancestors were obsessed with time anyway. Just not this kind. They tracked the sun, they tracked the shadows, they tracked the position of the stars and the length of the days, because knowing where you stood in time wasn't a convenience. It was survival information. When does the light run out? How long until the cold sets in? How much daylight is left to find food before the predators that hunt at dusk start moving? Not knowing where you were in time wasn't just inconvenient, it was dangerous. A human who lost track of how much daylight remained could end up stranded, exposed, unprotected exactly when the world became most threatening. So your brain built something to prevent that. An internal alarm whose entire job is to keep checking, keep orienting, keep answering one question over and over. Where am I right now in time? That question never fully turned off. It just lost its target. You don't need to track daylight to avoid predators anymore. But the system that used to do that job is still running in the background, and it still needs an answer. So it latches onto whatever clock is nearest, usually the one in your pocket. Neuroscientist Mark Whitman has spent years studying how the brain constructs its sense of time, and one of his core findings cuts right to the center of this. Your sense of time isn't measured by an internal clock the way you might assume. It's generated by your body, especially by a brain region called the insula, which constantly tracks your heartbeat, your breathing, your internal state. When you feel anxious or uncertain, your body's internal rhythms shift, and your perception of time distorts along with them. Time doesn't just pass for you. Your nervous system manufactures the feeling of it passing, and that feeling is deeply tied to how safe or unsettled you feel in the moment. Here's where it gets uncomfortable. If your body is even slightly anxious, time often feels like it's dragging, stretching, refusing to move. And what's the natural response to a feeling of being stuck? You check the clock. Not because the information helps, because checking gives you a tiny hit of control over something that otherwise feels unbearable to simply sit inside. Psychologist Claudia Hammond, who has researched time perception extensively, describes this as the difference between clock time and mind time. Clock time moves at a constant rate, 60 seconds a minute, no exceptions. Mind time bends depending on your emotional state. Boredom stretches it, anxiety stretches it even further. Engagement and flow compress it almost to nothing. When you're anxious and bored at once, which is exactly the state most people are in while waiting, scrolling, or stuck in a slow moment, mind time can feel almost unbearably slow. So checking the clock again and again isn't really about gathering data. It's a coping behavior. It's your nervous system reaching for something solid in a moment that feels formless. There's an older piece to this puzzle too, one anthropologists have pointed to for decades. Researcher Robert Levine spent years studying how different cultures around the world experience the pace of time, and he found something revealing. Cultures with rigid, clock-driven schedules often reported higher rates of time-related stress than cultures whose daily rhythms followed the sun, the seasons, or communal activity instead of a ticking number. The clock itself, the very tool meant to give you control over time, can end up being the thing that makes you feel like you're constantly losing the race against it. Why would a tool built to help you ended up doing the opposite? Because before clocks existed, there was no universal countdown running in the background of your life. Time was relative to what you were doing. Hunting took as long as it took. Hunger told you when to eat. The sun told you when to rest. Once you introduced a precise, unforgiving, always visible measurement of time, you introduce something your ancestors never had to contend with: a constant external scoreboard ticking whether you're paying attention to it or not, quietly suggesting that you might be falling behind it. That scoreboard is exactly what your phone keeps in your pocket. Every glance at the time is a quiet status check against an invisible deadline that may not even exist. Am I behind? Did I lose track? How much is left? This habit gets even harder to escape because of something neuroscientist David Eagleman has documented in his research on time perception. Novel or threatening experiences get encoded more densely in memory, which is part of why frightening or unfamiliar moments often feel, in retrospect, like they lasted far longer than they actually did. Uncertainty makes your brain pay closer attention, and closer attention makes time feel heavier, slower, and more in need of monitoring. The less certain you feel about a stretch of time, the more your brain wants to check in on it. So the compulsive glance at the clock isn't a character flaw, and it isn't simple impatience. It's an ancient orientation reflex, the same one that once scanned the horizon for daylight, now firing in a world that gave it a screen instead of a sky. Here's the twist most people miss entirely. The discomfort you feel waiting for time to pass isn't proof that time is moving slowly. It's proof that some part of you feels unanchored, and checking the clock is your nervous system's attempt to drop an anchor, even when there's nothing in particular to anchor against. Knowing this changes what the urge actually means. The next time your hand drifts toward your phone just to check the time, with nothing waiting on the other side of it, try pausing for one extra second before you look. Ask what you're actually anxious about underneath the time check. Often, it isn't the minutes at all. It's something else entirely, something the clock was never going to answer. You check the time. 10 minutes later, you don't reach for it at all. Not because the minutes stopped mattering, but because, for once, you stopped needing them to tell you where you stood. If this video taught you something new, please consider supporting the channel by liking, subscribing, and sharing it with someone who'd enjoy it too. Every bit of support helps this small channel keep creating thoughtful videos like this. Thanks for watching.